You want to get going?
All right, Kurt, you ready?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the July 6th Metropolitan Planning Organization Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Got to kind of start the meeting by doing some introductions. We have some new faces and names on here, and Ashley, I will turn that over for you to kind of go through the introductions.
Thank you. And first I'm going to do the meeting preamble. So, good afternoon. My name is Ashley Briers, Transportation Planner, and I'm with Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager on video. We'll work alongside Jeff Crick, who's the chair, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access channel 25. During the meeting, when you're not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can turn your video on and off by clicking on the video icon on the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on when you are participating in the meeting. When you are not participating, it is okay to turn your video off. Just remember to turn your video back on when you are participating. If you're participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Individuals who registered in advance to provide public comments will be remotely called on by name. And we didn't have anybody sign up, but we have Mr. Thornburg on the call. Do you have any? I guess we'll do that in a second. We'll go to if you have any public comments once we get there on item B. When you're called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct them to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, I will call on each member individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. And now we'll do roll call introductions. So we have Chad Voigt. Yeah.
Here.
Okay. David Cronin.
I'm here.
Okay. Do we have Kevin? Yes.
Here, I'm assuming me.
Yes, you, yes, sorry.
Hi.
Glenn Rodden is not here. Okay. We have Lindley Sanford.
Here.
Awesome. Jeff Crick.
Here.
Allison Smith.
Here.
Adam Weigel.
Here.
And Margreta.
Here.
Right. Plus, we have a few extra people today, so let's see. Laura McCullough, do you want to say who you're with?
Yeah, Laura McCullough with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, Community Health Planner.
And Ms. Cochran?
Yes, this is Cecily Cochran. I'm representing Federal Highway Kansas City.
Great. Steve Ballman?
Yep, Steve Ballman, area engineer, Topeka Metro with KDOT.
Okay. And I know Allie is with Eudora as an intern, yeah? Yep. And then we have JT. So I guess I'll move on to Jeff so you can ask about public comment.
Ashley, thank you. Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services. Now, item number B on the agenda, is there any public comment in the room? Ashley's saying there's no public comment in the room. Is there anyone like to provide public comment on Zoom? Please raise your digital hand and Ashley will let me know.
I don't see anybody.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services, thank you. So we will go ahead and move on to item number C, letter C. Approve the minutes of April 6th. Happy to entertain any changes or a motion related to those minutes.
This is Adam Weigel. I'll move approval of the April 6 minutes.
This is Lindley Sanford with the City of Lecompton. I'll second the motion.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any further discussion on the item? All right, seeing none. Ashley, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Chad?
Aye.
David Cronin?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Lindley?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Margreta?
Going to abstain since I wasn't in attendance.
Okay. So the motion passes 7-0 with 1 abstention.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda items. Item number 1 is the Lawrence Douglas County Intelligent Transportation System Plan. And I believe I'll turn it over to Ashley to guide us through that item.
Thank you. Ashley Briers, Transportation Planner. Let me share my screen. Okay, good. Oop. Sorry. I'm going to do that again. There we go. Second try is a good one. Okay. So again, my name is Ashley Briers, and this item is for the Intelligent Transportation Systems Plan, or ITS, and we have a short slideshow to present on it. Intelligent Transportation Systems is the use of technology in order to make transportation flow better, basically. And it integrates technology across all sorts of different systems and modes of transportation. And this is a plan that we're required to do, so we have done it. The last plan was completed in 2015. We did a minor update for this planning process, really to make sure that the programs were still accurate and to update the Transportation 2040 goals, because we had done a new long-range transportation plan between the old ITS plan and the new one. This process included a steering committee, which is shown here, which was formed by the MPO Policy Board in December. And we met 4 times over Zoom this past spring and had very specific topics for each meeting and really moved through the process very quickly. The ITS plan is tied together with Transportation 2040, which is our long-range plan, and the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP. So there are 21 projects, and this table shows how they match with the goals from Transportation 2040, how they're implementing the goals. And then it's also coordinated with the Transportation Improvement Program, because when projects are submitted to be included in the TIP, we then ensure that they are consistent with the ITS plan. And if they're not, we'll have to update the ITS plan or make sure we can make it make sense. Here are the projects. There are 21 projects. The green ones are new projects that were included based on the steering committee's discussion. So alternative fuels or low to no emission infrastructure and vehicles programs. At one point we included that as just electric vehicles, but then after discussion with the committee decided that we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into just electric vehicles, and so we included alternative fuels. And then also a shared mobility program is a new one. We did remove the interagency information systems sharing project because we realized it was very similar to the elements within the event and incident management project. So we combined some of that together. This chart shows the financials for each of the projects and the programs. And so the top 10 are all ongoing programs, so there would not have a one-time expense. So it's ongoing. And this was extremely hard to put together because it was such a unknown on on the cost, especially for the electric vehicle, for the alternative fuels information. And then some of the other stuff is just too far out, so we didn't have exact numbers. But our estimates are 28 million to 63 million in order to implement all of these projects. Now, there are 21 projects, but I'm just going to highlight 3 projects that are just kind of interesting so you can see them. Here's an example of one. This is the Fiber Communications Expansion Program, and this map shows the different intersections where prioritization of including fiber has been done, and we're working through that process. The IT department for Lawrence is the one responsible for this fiber plan. Dynamic Message Signs project has 2 parts. The dynamic message signs along K10, which are these little green dots here, and then ongoing possible signs sometime in the future that do not have attached funding to them. But part of the process was discussing where would it make sense to have DMS signs at some point. And then the last one here is transit traveler information, so signs at the multimodal transfer facility and other places that would show when the next bus will arrive. There was a public comment for this plan. We had 3 public comments. 2 were positive public comments, and 1 thought we should do more to encourage walkability rather than relying dependency on cars. On the agenda, we included a table that shows the comments and staff responses. And that's all we have for this ITS plan. Let me stop sharing. Do you have any questions?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Any questions from the committee for Ashley? Ashley, I've got one, and I don't know if there's an answer to it or if it's a little early in the item. We're talking about the digital messaging signs. A couple of those looked like they were inside the Lawrence city limits.
Yep.
Would those be controlled by the city of Lawrence, or would it be like a joint control between KDOT and the city, or is that just kind of to be determined as the signs come online?
Yeah, so Ashley Byers, Transportation Planner. The thought would be that would be to be determined as it comes online, but we also discussed sharing the possibility of putting messages on signs. Some of the KDOT ones, maybe putting some Lawrence information. Some of the other ones that are controlled by KC Scout, which is out of Kansas City, having some coordination of messages if necessary.
Thank you. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. If there's no other questions from the committee for Ashley, I'll turn over for public comment on this item. So if anybody has any public comment on this one, please raise your digital hand, or if there's anyone present in the commission room, I'd be happy to hear the item. I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand on this item, so the committee, I turn it back to the committee on that item. Any other questions, thoughts, motions on this item that you'd like to take forward?
This is Adam Michael. I'll recommend approval of the Lawrence Douglas County Intelligent Transportation Systems Plan.
Allison Smith, KDOT Planning, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion to approve by Adam, a second by Allison. Any other discussion on the item before the vote? right, seeing none. Ashley, would you mind reading the roll, please?
Sure. Ashley Briers, Transportation Planner. Chad?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Lindley?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Margreta?
Aye.
All right. Item passes 8-0.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Thank you, Ashley. Move us on to item number 2, which is the Countywide Bike Plan. And I believe Jessica is going to help guide us through that item.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. Ashley's going to share the first little short presentation I have. We began this process a few years ago when we went to update the current existing countywide bikeway plan, and we began that process intending to do one plan. Mainly, particularly because we wanted to reconcile the various bike and ped, particularly the bike portions of planning that had been done, including particularly for Eudora and Baldwin City, some of their parks and rec planning. As we got into that, we also found that we really wanted to find consistency with the visions for Safe Routes to School planning, and we finished those plans last year before we came back to finish this plan. We really wanted a vision, and what we heard from the community is for a continuous low stress bikeway network, so comfortable facilities, and criteria to establish bikeways kind of on some of those best practices and standards, basically based on speed and volume. Not just a bike lane is not a bike lane, it's not the same on every street. And we wanted to really lay out an approach that kind of targeted some different tactics to build some better education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation tools into the plan, including some regional performance measures that could help end up supporting and supplementing the Lawrence Bike Plan, which we finished separately from this process, even though we started them together, to really track what's happening in the region related to countywide bikeway implementation. We really built the case for bicycling that's in the literature. It ties back to our community health improvement plan and health. It ties into mobility. It ties into some of our environmental goals. Really look at some of our regional safety goals and the national literature that shows the benefits, the economic benefits of places that people can bike. So we asked community members that in their engagement, why they bike, and we got a variety of responses, and we shared some of those in the plan. We felt overall, people told us these are just called out the responses from the process that were not Lawrence specific. So if anybody told us they lived in unincorporated areas of Douglas County or any Eudora, Baldwin City, or Lecompton, and people generally somewhat or strongly agreed, or for the majority, that they would bicycle more if they felt they could do so safely. And that really speaks to the level of comfort concerns that we heard and the desire to have facilities that are built for the appropriate speed and volume of the roadway. I showed you here the Lawrence and the non-Lawrence responses, but in this process, that the 5 reasons people that do not bicycle. And while we can't control things like weather, we can control things around enforcement of aggressive driving behavior, concerns about personal safety or unsafe roadway conditions, and or the lack of dedicated bicycle facilities. Sometimes we can't control time and destination, although there's some other long-term drivers for land use that can probably could do some of that control. But this was kind of an interesting view about why people who responded to our survey said they don't bicycle. And there's some, I believe, some things that were identified in here that really give us ways to target some of the solutions to making bicycling more attractive. So we also asked people how bicycling or the needs of people who bicycle should be prioritized in terms of the transportation network and with people who use other modes. So people who drive and walk, and you can see, again, a majority told us they somewhat or strongly agree that those needs should also be prioritized and should be important in our region. we drilled really down into the comfort conversation. We provided people in their responses photos of different types of facilities to bike on. You can see on the left those facility types and ask them how comfortable. If you look in the appendices, we have this about riding with their children too, to understand where people really felt in terms of the idea of where a concerned cyclist would feel comfortable riding. The responses, these are all the responses in the county, but you can see the comfort level, which is the lighter color blue on the right, gets a lot bigger as you go up in the bars. And that's really because as you go up, there's also increased level of protection of the bikeway facility. And so this really reflects and I think justified some of the conversation that we've been having in Lawrence, but also countywide about right sizing the facility. Our vision for this plan is similar to the Lawrence one, a bikeway network that supports safe and comfortable riding for all. And as a result of that, there's some goals that are very specific that have performance that we can track in them related to safety and crashes, related to implementation of the bikeways. And when we take opportunities to, during road improvements, make safety improvements or implement standalone bikeway infrastructure and what we envision that to be in terms of mileage increases by 2030. And then also some goals around installing signage and implementing the American Discovery Trail and US Bike Network. So we that was one thing we had really heard in the long range planning process last time, that we felt like there was no good inter-county connections. And so we took that opportunity to coordinate on a larger scale some of that network and identified that in the countywide plan. But I did talk about a 5 E's approach. So thinking about more than just engineering. We did really think about this plan engaged people, and through the Safe Routes to School plan, we felt like, particularly for Baldwin City and Eudora, that's where they're going to make the most momentum in implementing shared use path network, which is part of the bikeway network, is around schools. And so some of the Safe Routes to School implementation stuff also applies. We also took the opportunity to identify locations for things like the 3-foot passing signage, 3-foot passing law, and educational signs. Opportunities, again, to identify the value of items like the bicycle rideability map, which we produce in partnership with the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee. And then some other opportunities you can see, particularly around engineering and the components of some of the recommendations we have around crossing improvements, designing, implementing the bikeway network we have in the plan, and other considerations around engineering that tied to enforcement, things like lowering the speed limit or installing traffic calming to improve safety. While this is kind of probably challenging to see any specific line, what I think I'm going to show you kind of what the plan entails in terms of existing and planned networks across the county. It connects all the cities to each other. The dash lines are future lines where we've called out where we anticipate the separation need to be based on that level of comfort that we would anticipate seeing in the design guideline. Ashley, you can flip through these. We have them for each individual community, and these are consistent with their Safe Routes to School planning alignments and their Parks and Rec master plans. So they really do create a cohesive image of what biking and walking will look like and could look like in Eudora, Baldwin City, and Lecompton. I mentioned before that we talked about interstate and intercounty routes, and at a high level, these have been identified across our networks for some where they are appropriate now in terms of where the best route is for people currently taking these cross country routes, and then also where, if improvements are made, routes could be varied or alignments could be changed based on when improvements get implemented. And we went through the process of discussing some of these and making sure they reflected the work that we've done in Douglas County and that we plan to do. On each of those other maps, you saw where the lines were purple, blue, or pink. That corresponds with this idea of separation, and it's tied into the design guide And so we're looking at, major separation is highest speed and volume routes down to a shared street where you have slower speeds and lower traffic volumes. It's appropriate to share infrastructure, more like a roadway with a paved shoulder for some of our rural routes that are very, very popular bicycling routes. Ashley, and that's what this design guide is. It matches the design guide for Lawrence, and it reflects really what we envision tying together best practices from NACDO and AASHTO and MUTCD, which are all the federal guidance for federal facility criteria from either the manual for uniform traffic control devices or the National Association of Traffic Officials. So we are excited to bring some of those bikeway types to our region, some of which are newer than others. We finalized this plan with a public comment period from May 6th to June 5th. For the countywide plan, we had 3 responses, no specific comments, but that indicated that they supported the plan, and its implementation. That's what I have to present to you today. I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have as you consider recommending approval to the MPO policy board for the countywide plan.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Thank you, Jessica. Any questions about the report or the presentation for Jessica? All right, well, seeing none, I'll go ahead and see if there's any public comment on this item. Feel free to raise your digital hand, or if you're in the room, feel free to let Ashley know. And Ashley, I'm not sure I can see that panel, but let me know if there's any Zoom hands that are raised.
This is Ashley Briers. There's nobody in the room, and I don't see any hands.
All right, Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. I'll turn it back to the committee here. Thoughts, questions, comments, motions?
This is Adam Weigel. I would move that we recommend approval of the countywide bike plan.
This is Lindley Sanford, City of Lecompton. I'll second the motion.
We have a motion by Adam and a second by Lindley to recommend approval of the plan. With that, any other comments and questions? I'll assume no on that. Ashley, would you mind reading the roll on this item, please?
Sure. Ashley Briers, Transportation Planner. Chad?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Lindley?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Margreta?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes 8-0.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Thank you, Ashley. That moves us on to, item number 3, which is our Lawrence Pedestrian Plan Steering Committee item. And Jessica, I think you're going to kind of guide us on that one too.
Maybe. Okay. We have taken the opportunity to begin work on our regional pedestrian plan update that's been identified in our unified planning work program for third and fourth quarter. And so as that begins, we would like to lay out the framework for our steering committee. And if Ashley, you could share the slide of the layout we have. We consulted we have made the decision that, like the countywide plan, we are going to split the pedestrian plan, the regional pedestrian plan, into a Lawrence and then the Baldwin City, Eudora, Lecompton plan. So we'll have two plans. And part of that rationale for doing so is we really want to not dilute the work that we need to do in Baldwin City and Eudora and Lecompton, and then recognize that the intensity and interest from the public in the Lawrence process is going to be a lot higher. And so we kind of really felt like the better process to be in the amount of progress that each kind of community is making would be best reflected by having two plans. So we are proposing this pedestrian plan update steering committee for the Lawrence section. And as such, we would ask if you see, as such, we'd see the steering committee as the top part, and really the staff advisors that kind of would serve in the role both to consult on the planning process and or be included on the invitations to meetings to participate and follow along in that way also. That's kind of how we have framed the transit reroute redesign work that we've been doing, and it's worked. We believe it's working pretty well. So we would welcome feedback on that, and or based on the steering committee list, if you would like to weigh in on, if you feel like we have all the voices that we need. We have consulted our partners in Lawrence, in planning and in MSO, to kind of make sure that their thoughts are reflected in this, who should be involved. But I would welcome any other feedback you might have as we look for a recommendation from you to establish this to send to the MPO policy board.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Thank you, Jessica. Any comments or suggestions related to the list for this one?
This is Adam Weigel. I might just be missing it, but was there thought about USD school district involved? I know they've been involved with a lot of Safe Routes to School stuff, but didn't know their role in this type of process.
Yeah, so thanks, Adam. Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I think that's a good question, and we talked about it. We talked about it mainly because we had heavily involvement from them in the work group, in the Safe Routes to School work group that we have done. We felt really that this pedestrian plan, while it will prioritize some of the work done on Safe Routes to School and be consistent in implementation, it really goes beyond their scope of work. And we didn't feel like at this point that we would really get their engagement that we would get their time in terms of their really at capacity as well. But also that we didn't feel like if we had a specific issue that may be related to schools, we could reach out to them. But we didn't feel like for the entire planning process that it was important to have them at the table. We haven't shared with you, we have a draft scope of work, and also, particularly for Lawrence, I think this maybe applies that in the way that the city of Lawrence prioritizes bicycle and pedestrian funding for projects through the non-motorized prioritization policy, there is already heavy prioritization on safe routes to school routes. And so while this plan will look at routes to probably transit and healthy food access and parks to add to maybe some of those gap projects that are identified, the prioritization and the funding still has a separate local process that would need to be reevaluated to change any of that prioritization. So those projects will still score very highly when it looks to implementation. So I don't mean to write them off when I am saying just because they're not at the table. Those safe routes to school projects are, as a community has kind of said in terms of setting that prioritization, have been heavily prioritized for implementation.
Thank you.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Any other questions for Jessica on this item?
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I'll just add one more thing. We are going to come back after we develop we're trying to figure out our strategy for work groups and steering committee for the other part of this, the pedestrian planning work we're going to be doing this year for Eudora, Baldwin City, and Lecompton. And we will come back at a future meeting with that structure, in case you're wondering.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you. Seeing no additional comment from the committee here, but for public comment, any member of the public have comment on this particular item, please raise your Zoom hands or let Ashley know that would like to provide comment on the item. All right, seeing none, I'll turn back to the committee on that one. And Jessica, just to confirm, this is to recommend to establish the committee at this point in time. So, Jeff Trey, Planning and Development Services, happy to entertain any motions on this item.
Dave Cronin.
I'm sorry, Dave. Just one more question. Timeline for when this group might get started.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. Our attempt would be to entertain this at a July MPO Policy Board meeting and to get appointments made in August, to have a first meeting in September, where we would be able to hopefully present our first draft of existing conditions and talk to the committee about buy-in to what we envision the scope of work to be.
I have a question too, Jessica. So I may have missed that. Is there a plan for Eudora to have their own separate Baldwin, Lecompton? So will it be 4, or it's Lawrence and then one other one for the other 3?
So Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. We're still trying to figure that out. So how we did it on the Bikeway Committee, we did it as we had just the MPO Policy Board overall steering committee, which has representation from each of the communities, weigh in on that for the countywide bikeway portion of the plan. So for the pedestrian one, though, those pedestrian routes are not connected through the unincorporated parts of the county. So it doesn't exactly work in the same way. And there's a little more localized interest in each of the cities. And we feel like if we bring them all together to work as a steering committee, we're not going to get the level of effort or engagement we want, because it'll be kind of diluted down. Like Eudora doesn't necessarily care what Lecompton or Baldwin City is doing, in the sense of you have valuable time resources. And so we're thinking about how we're going to do that. And we've had kickoff meetings with all the cities to kind of talk about their interest in the plan, what they'd like to see, how that works. And we haven't finalized what we're doing, but we're kind of envisioning some work groups that would report to another single steering committee. So each city would have a work group that would then feed work up to another steering committee. That would be like all of the other cities. That's kind of what we're envisioning. We'll bring that back next month.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Dave, I think I'm not sure you had a comment or a motion there, or just didn't want to lose that in the shuffle there.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, City of Lawrence. I'd move to recommend establishing the Lawrence Pedestrian Plan Steering Committee.
Adam Weigel, I'll second.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development says we have a motion by David, a second by Adam to recommend approval of the committee. Any other comments or questions on this? All right, seeing none. Ashley, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure. Ashley Byers, Transportation Planner. Chad?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Lindley?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Margreta?
Aye.
All right, motion passes 8-0.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Thank you, Ashley. And if my screen is correct, I think this moves us on to item number 4, which is Safe Routes to School Amendment number 1. And Ashley, I believe, is going to help us do that item.
That's correct. Ashley Byers, Transportation Planner. I'm going to share my screen again. Right. The Lawrence Safe Route to School plan was approved by the MPO Policy Board in November of last year, so 2020. And just recently, we learned that USD 497 is evolving Kennedy Elementary School from a elementary school into a early childhood community center. And so that means we need to amend our Safe Routes to School routes because previously we had routes for Kennedy Elementary, and now those students are attending either Cordley, Prairie Park, or New York. So this Amendment 1 is to update the routes to reflect the change due to Kennedy. And the school provided us with anonymized student data, which we mapped, and you created heat maps so we could see where there were clusters of students and what school they were going to. And we just added 2 little parts to the routes. So Cordley now has another bit here along 19th. It's circled in blue, and then down Haskell. And then Prairie Park has along Harper and then a little bit along 19th. So those were added to the routes. And because of those changes, we then needed to remove the Kennedy projects. So those are being removed. And this project is Harper Street Bike Project is actually now on the Prairie Park routes. So it's now listed as a Prairie Park project. And then when we added those new segments of route, it meant that we needed to have some new projects. So there's some sidewalk and bike projects here. And the group that worked on this was the Safe Routes to School working group that has worked on the entire Safe Routes to School stuff that we've been doing since 2019. So we're just continuing to work on that for now. And then also USD 497 asked us to change shalls to shoulds throughout the document when we're referring to things that they're going to do. So we're going to make that change as well. Here's a list of just the updates. Surprisingly, when you remove a school, you have to change a lot of things. So we had to change the list of schools and the maps here. And then in the summary, it shows all the changes. So this was the old map where Kennedy was in purple here, and now it's not there, and it's part of those 3 schools. I won't scroll through all of those, but if you have any specific questions, I can go to a specific part in the summary or try to answer those for you.
Ashley, thank you. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Any questions or comments on this item from the committee? All right, seeing none there. Any public comment on this item?
There's Ashley Breyer's no one in the room, at least.
Not seeing any public comment on that item, so I'd be happy to entertain motion on this update, or excuse me, this amendment. My apologies.
Lindley Sanford, City of Lecompton. I move to approve the amendment to the Safe Routes to School for Lawrence.
Dave Cronin, City of Lawrence, second.
We have a motion by Lindley and a second by David on this particular item. Any other comments from the committee? All right, Ashley, if I may, we'll give trouble you for the roll, please.
Sure. Ashley Breyer's Transportation Planner. Chad?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Lindley?
Yes.
Jeff?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Margaretta?
Aye.
Right. Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services, thank you. And it takes us on to item number 5, which is the Lawrence Transportation and Land Use Best Practices Guide and Development Discussion. And I believe that's Jessica's going to talk to us about.
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I'm going to speak with you a little bit about this. We have attached to the agenda the draft kind of scope of work for this proposed research topics that we're proposing to do technical research on to kind of provide some guidance or recommendations related to implementing the vision that's in our long-range transportation and land use plans. And so I'll read through that list really quickly. And then we can talk about it. When we've consulted kind of about how we should structure this work, this isn't making any of the actual changes. This is just a process to research where we stand and compared to national best practices and research some known topics that have been of concern or interest to the community and or just locally pertinent stuff. So you can see a possible consideration of major thoroughfares map revision, which is the street classifications that stratify and connect the land development code and the street design standards, particularly in Lawrence and throughout Douglas County. Establishment or consideration for filling in the placeholders for current transportation corridor overlays that are in the development code. Considerations about access management or corridor specific access management needs, right-of-way parking policies and parking best practices, connectivity policies for bicycle and pedestrian networks. And when we thought about this, we're thinking about things like implementing those as development occurs and or pedestrian connections across from the right-of-way to store entrances or other considerations, probably with like curvilinear style street development. And then streetscape design. And while these are all some of them are a little more specific and some of them are a little higher level, we envisioned putting together some white paper type research to document where we are compared to some alternatives, whether that kind of be some peer communities and or other national best practice communities to kind of present some options that we would then envision being topics for future conversation at the appropriate body. So whether that be a planning commission or multimodal transportation commission to consider locally for implementation. And those could then be prioritized by planning and development services, municipal services and operations, or other relevant cities or county staff for implementation over a multi-year timeline we would envision. So because this is a little bit different than other processes we have done, and it's pretty technical in nature, we envisioned using the TAC as the guiding policy. So we envisioned bringing to you next month, hopefully, the start of what that's going to look like, kind of as a template with a topic or two. We'll see how far we get in our research to kind of start that process. And we'll expect help from you to review that work and ask relevant questions so we can strengthen the documents that we are able to then provide for additional future conversation around any of these items. I'd entertain any questions or comments you have about that plan of how we envision to do this work.
This is Laura McCulloch with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health. I just had a question as to whether there will be an opportunity for the community or stakeholders to provide input into what research areas might be included in this.
Yeah, so Laura, this is Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. This is really a first step, I think, in us exploring some of these issues and being able to spend some staff capacity and doing some work. Ultimately, the MPO TAC or the MPO will not be the decision-making bodies on these kind of technical reports. And I think that while these are public committees that people can attend, I believe really the public process around implementation will happen and can occur in terms of feedback we get either through this process with this staff. If you hear of other things you'd like us to consider, we will be somewhat limited in capacity. I mean, in terms of what we can entail, this is a pretty big visionary list, and we'll get through as much of it as we can and then kind of just keep reassessing, I think, seeing how it goes and how effective or useful this process is to leading to some prioritization and change. There are some things that could happen that could change this, particularly the city of Lawrence and a consideration in the capital improvement plan to rewrite the land development code. If that happens, you can see how some of these things would be tied to that. And depending on where we are at in the process, may or may not be longer relevant, depending on what that timeline looks like. Or it might feed into that process, which once they get into those implementation processes, that's where we see this background research really providing just public information to public processes that would need to occur. And those would all need to be determined probably by the city or geographic entity implementing those changes.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Now, Jessica, just making sure I got this right. You're not asking for a motion on this particular. This is more of an FYI for the committee to be thinking about as the process kicks off.
Yeah, so I think, Jessica Morton's your transportation planning manager. I think questions like what Laura had are the type of conversation we want to have. If there are other things you think should be added to the list, whether that's now or across future meetings, if you know people are interested in this, as members of TAC to alert them to this is the process so we can get their engagement. Although we really do envision this to be a really technical process. And so really it's about preparing information in a way that it could be presented to some other local public bodies for their consideration.
Thank you.
Jessica, this is Allison Smith at KDOT. So you're going to do this research, and then what? So what is the product? What is the purpose of doing this? I mean, I get it's great to do research, but what is going to be done with it?
Well, I think already we've, Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager, all of these things are things that either the Multimodal Transportation Commission, previous conversations with TAC, or stakeholders, our membership on this call, or even conversations that we've had with larger planning commission bodies as we talk about implementing the visions that are in T2040 or Plan 2040, that some of these code specific changes are going to be required, I think, to get us to that point. And the product in our part for the first part is some white paper style documents that are research. I think at a higher level, we will be coming back to TAC and talking with maybe local governments and cities. Like there has been expressed interest in revising and stratifying how major thoroughfares is done. So the conversation so far has been about, specifically that example, has been about exploring whether there needs to be for collector streets that is tied to the local land development code, and street design standards, if there needs to be a residential collector and a commercial collector. That was the idea that was thrown out there. So one of the things we're researching, like for example, that'll probably be one of the first things that we do. And we identified in the UPWP, like we haven't written future work yet to revise those. We're hoping that at the end of this process, we have a list that says, okay, if you do this thing, it needs to be coordinated with this thing, and kind of putting together some of the context for how we would proceed around these issues. And that's why I said it could change depending on what happens with land development code. And some of them may not result in a change, like right-of-way parking standards. That might be something we explore in terms of pulling back out the EPA study that was done around neighborhood parking, looking at the parking strategy, making recommendations about some best practices for cities. There might be a decision by this body that we're good where we're at, that there isn't a place we need to move. But then we might need to go back and reflect. And this is why we feel like this is a good project to do before our long range plan development really kicks off next year, to be able to have a larger conversation around strategies that we would want to identify through that public planning process for consideration of implementation and inclusion in the long range plan. Does that answer your question? I don't know that each of them has a specific end result.
Yeah, more or less.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. Any other comments or questions for Jessica on this item? I'll also just put it out there. Anybody from a member of the public would like to provide comment or question on this item, feel free to do so with the digital hand or any other way to indicate. Ashley, I will go ahead and hazard a guess. You probably have no one in the room still. Okay. All right. Well, seeing none there, and from what I understand, we don't need to take a motion on this at this point. So that will be something we'll see in future meetings coming up. So that gets us over to, this kind of segues very wonderfully into what we're just talking about. Item number 6, which is the 2022 Unified Planning Work Program discussion. And Jessica, I think, is going to help us with that.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. We're at that point in the year where we would like to begin the conversation with you all about the work that we draft into our 2022 Unified Planning Work Program. We know that a majority of our time next year is going to be spent on our transportation, what we believe will be 2050 long range transportation plan development, which needs to be approved by March of 2023. And so we have laid out kind of the framework, at least in our minds, and plan to in the UPWP to also pursue the modeling, a consultant to help assist with the modeling work for the development of that plan in-house. But we wanted to have a conversation with you all about other remaining transportation planning items or work that we should consider or need to coordinate with for next year as we think about what that plan looks like and what the MPO workload looks like.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. And I will just throw it open to the floor and for anyone to provide some thoughts on that upcoming work plan.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager in City of Lawrence. I don't know if this belongs in UPWP, but I know we are pursuing the potential for a zero emission transition plan for 2022 on the transit side of things to help us prepare in a technical way how we get to 100% electric fleet and what that looks like operationally for us and infrastructure needs and all of that. We're still trying to look at other cities to figure out what like the public engagement process looks like for something like that, or how much it's more technical in nature. But I know that's something on our radar for planning work in 2022.
Was that Allison Smith, Kate, Adam, was that an AIC application?
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. And Jessica, as far as KDOT goes, we don't have any different expectations than normal. So nothing as far as that has changed. And as far as dollar amounts, we're just recommending using your final CPG amount from your agreement for this year for 2021, plus whatever expected carryover that you estimate. That's just a kind of a conservative amount since we don't have a federal transportation bill at this point. So that's kind of just the estimate that we're telling all of our MPOs to use right now. So if you want to use that, that dollar amount for planning purposes, that's what we're going with.
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. With clawback is planned for the end of the year, I would assume we anticipate having a carryover that's significant enough to help us cover some of the cost of our modeling, and we will be making that formal request. Is there a point in time when it's best for us to make that?
I would just, I will get you a time frame, but I would expect there to more than likely be a deferral of the clawback, since we're kind of still in this whole pandemic operations phase. We haven't had any firm decisions, but I'm not a betting person, but fairly safe to say that we'll probably do the same thing we did last year. We'll have
And
a
if
team
not,
meeting.
I guess Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager, it would be helpful for us to know if there's in general a timeline. I mean, I can send that email regardless, probably if you guys are making that decision, if that's better to do
we're gonna have
in the next few months.
Yeah. Allison Smith, Kata, we'll have a team meeting this week, and I'll make sure I bring it up, but we have briefly mentioned it. So yeah, and that's an eligible ask because you're TDM and stuff. So certainly, but with the situation being as it is, I can imagine we will do the same thing we did last year, which was, but I'll get you a kind of a more certain answer, but that would be my best guess at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
This is Laura McCulloch with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health. I'm not sure if this makes sense to include in this particular work plan, particularly because I know that it's being integrated into other projects. But I just wanted to mention the food access stuff just because there are several organizations that are interested right now in prioritizing food access through transportation. And your assistance, of course, will be helpful in the planning and evaluation process for that.
Yeah, Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager. I think we would include those types of programmatic things that are some more smaller term thing. Of course, our capacity to do some of that work will just be determined by where we are in our long range plan development and where that falls. I really hope that for those of you that don't know, we're working right now on some data mapping around food access and sharing some of the available data related to transportation access with public health and the Food Policy Council. We have put together some client mapping, particularly for a local social service agency that has allowed us to compare that client data to some of the transportation disadvantaged analysis we've done and we found some correlation, which helps support some of the data that we've gotten from the census and that distribution in our community around transportation access, because particularly they not only had client data, but they asked people how they got to their location. And people that said they didn't have a car, that data also correlated with what we had found for transportation disadvantaged populations. And so we're working on some of those things around looking at sharing that information in the transit route redesign study, but also exploring, hopefully in the pedestrian planning in terms of access to food destinations, how those transportation networks, particularly like sidewalks or bikeway networks or transit access, is impacted by those populations. So yeah, Laura, I would think we would want to continue that work. And if not, even the Lawrence strategic plan, I think, and their equity initiatives are really, and the direct statement around food access are going to support incorporating that type of analysis and data and work into what we would consider our traditional federally required transportation plans.
Adam Weigel, City of Lawrence. Another thing that staff's currently working on are some technical models for how we prioritize bus stop improvements. Historically, it's been largely reliant on ridership, trying to do the most good with limited resources for the most people. I know we're trying to model in a number of other things. I mean, food access is part of that, but there's a lot of equity and environmental justice zone considerations with what stops we would want to improve next. So that work has already started, but may bleed over to 2022, just depending on how that goes. Right now we're in the in the weeds of a lot of technical work, but at some point it'll make sense for it to move into more of a engagement type planning process and kind of getting some gut checks on what the right path forward is.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I think it's our best interest, Adam, to continue to coordinate on that work.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. The one that I'll add here, and I'm not sure it's quite in the same line with this one, but I just throw it out there for consideration, is maybe the work around transportation and how it connects with affordable housing efforts that we're seeing in the communities and throughout our whole county in many ways. I know that's a very tall and large kind of ask to put on the UPWP, but it might be worth just having it on there as something that we might fold into the T2050 update or environmental justice or some of those other components out there. So I'd put that forward for everyone else's thought and consideration.
This is Laura McCulloch with Public Health, and I just want to kind of, Jeff's comment reminded me as well regarding the anti-poverty portion of the community health plan. One of the goals is improving accessibility of transportation. And so that might be something as well that we would like MPO's assistance with in moving forward with that goal of the community health plan. And I don't know what all that might entail. I know those conversations have started.
Yeah, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. We are still in the process of working through a conversation with KDOT about the development of a mobility manager position in Douglas County that we envision within our planning and development services transportation planning unit, being able to support some of that work. And we'll have to figure out how that aligns as it is in our structure in that unit, like how KDOT maybe about what your expectations are, Allison, would be good to figure out in terms of that work plan, because it's in the MPO structure and supervised kind of in that, using the Regional Transit Advisory Committee as the expectation that that work would be incorporated into the UPWP, even though it's not paid and billed out of the UPWP, but it's a separate grant process? Or would it just be mentioned in like, this is covered by this position, and then just billed separately since that's a state grant process? I don't know if there's any mobility planners that are housed basically within city MPO structures in the state yet.
Allison Smith, KDOT. Not that I'm aware of, but one thing that I know one of my other MPOs does, and it's perfectly fine, is to show other planning efforts that are going on within the region. And so one thing you can do is carve out a separate section of your UPWP to show, if you want to show some of that work that the mobility manager is doing, or this food access work. It may not be work that's billed to CPG, but you want to show, other planning work, or kind of tell the whole planning story as it relates to transportation. So that's certainly something that you can put in your UPWP, just to show, to put in context everything that's going on in the region. And so maybe that's kind of also the place for to bookmark some of the mobility managers' duties and efforts as that moves forward as well. So just an idea to toss out.
Dave, Jessica Morton, Transportation Planning Manager. Dave Cronin, do you have anything specific you can think about in terms of CIP or planning for any projects that you guys have going on next year that you would need our involvement in?
Well, next year we are working on, well, I guess we're starting this year to work on plans to reconstruct Wakarusa, but I think in the future, I think the two big corridor expansion projects for streets would be West 6th Street and Bob Billings, west of K10. So those are on my mind. That could be maybe tied into the travel demand model with the, I guess, Transportation 2050 or the update of the transportation plan. So those streets or other arterials that we may extend to serve growth, whether it be Haskell or 31st Street or any other street. So that might be kind of folded into the TDM, but the only other thing I would mention would be a corridor or access management plan for 6th Street between downtown, I guess, Mass Street and Castled, Wakarusa, somewhere in there. We've talked about that before. It just hasn't risen to the level of some of the other things that we've been working on, you guys have been working on. So, but
Jessica, this is Alice with KDOT. The 23rd Street corridor studies that were going to happen, have those just been kind of put on hold indefinitely?
Yeah, Jessica Morton's your Transportation Planning Manager. Yes, when we made the decision to invest and share some of the responsibility for the transit route redesign and recognizing that our remaining funding priorities have to go towards having resources to update our model, travel demand model for our plan development, we really kind of exhausted our financial capacity to support consideration of any additional corridor planning work along 23rd Street. The commission, I also believe, and Jeff, you can speak to this, the city commission has postponed some of that project. We're waiting for the recommended CIP to come out from the city of Lawrence. But I know between that and the land development code, I believe the land development code is going to likely be prioritized, that update over additional corridor planning work. But that will still have that public process. So at this time, I don't know that that's on a work plan for 2022.
Yeah, I know. I seem to remember it got kind of hijacked with the pandemic and public participation and priorities had changed. I just didn't remember what had happened.
Correct planning and development services. We did have it going. We were have it going last year, which turned out to be the middle of the pandemic. So we had to put that on pause for a bit to go with it, but we still have it as part of our CIP, and I think it's still in the mix. So it could be a future item coming out, but at the moment, I think it's a little murky. But it's something we're still tracking and hoping to see happen sometime soon.
That's cool. That's fine.
Yeah, but I guess Jeff's saying that this is just Morton, Transportation Planning Manager. Jeff's statement about that really would be, we are seeing that, meaning a Lawrence project. There won't necessarily, there might be coordination with MPO and process around transportation planning, but it won't be an MPO project.
Okay. Cool.
This is Chad Voigt, County Engineer. Jessica, can we talk a little bit about the idea of road classification updates? And I'll share with the group what I just recently kind of learned. We had, I think in 2017, we went through and just did some minor edits to our functional classifications for federal highways. And the KDOT map just came out last month or in May. And we actually have some new RS routes, which are the federal aid routes. And those are falling on, in some cases, township roads. And so I don't think we realized the significance at the time of our actions and decisions about future road classifications. And, you know, in one case, it's way out south and it's a road that's on section line. Looks like, you know, if you were planning urban growth out there, it would make sense to run that major collector down that section line. But, you know, you go through there today and it's a township road and there's no way we want to make it a county road right now. But it's coming back to us as an RS route. And there's a statute that says that because of that, it's automatically a county maintained road. And so I think we want to maybe make some corrections to that classification map to pull back from some of those locations. And then there's another area that's kind of going the other way where I was trying to figure out how the county could maybe take over. It'd be Lawrence East 15th Street extended east where it becomes 1500 Road. We've got a lot of people that go back and forth from Eudora to Lawrence that way. You know, I've heard comments about eventually having a bike route along the side of the road to connect the two cities. And right now that's a Wakarusa Township road, but it goes the other way on the new KDOT map because what they do is they use the last census that was available, which in that case was 2010. And they look at the urban area boundary, which is defined simply by population density. It's nothing to do with city limits. And that basically wipes out everything in that area for county purposes. So it's all on the city maps. And I think that the county still could maintain that. So looking at like the next, or maybe at this work plan next year, we could look at what is the county going to do in the interim before Lawrence ever grows that way. So David, you were thinking about things to the west, and I'm kind of thinking about things to the east. It's an area that doesn't seem like it will annex or change in the near future. And yet we have some serious travel demand and some needs there for traffic that I think the county really has a better role in. It also could relate to Noria Road and us maybe having an agreement to work on that and make that just a continual county route through that area. So just some ideas, but that's what I've been thinking about. And then Jessica, I had that question for you. How can we do an update to our functional classification?
Yeah, and Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager, we just started looking at that. We updated our functional classification map prior to the last long range plan update. And so that would be something we can entertain I'm working on a UPWP amendment for this year if we want to begin some of that work prior to what we envisioned for the plan development next year. But at the latest, we would be doing that in 2022, I think. So let's have that conversation about timeline, and we'll see what we can do to figure it into the workload to see what impacts that conversation may or may not have on your process. Does that work?
Yeah, that's great.
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Any other items for the list or any additions to add for kind of the kickoff for the UPWP?
Yeah, so I guess Jeff, I'll just add one more thing. Jessica Morton, your transportation planning manager. We envision what this process looks like now is we draft up a draft UPWP that gets sent out for solicitation for comments from our state and federal partners. And then we bring it back to you, I believe, and then we release you'll see it as a draft before we release for a public comment period, before we're asking for your approval. We like to frame that are asking for recommendations of your approval to send to MPO policy board, hopefully in November. We like to get that adopted by November, the end of November. So it's ready and in play for 2022.
Yeah, so I will also throw open for public comment while I'm thinking. I want to leave that out there. Does anybody from the public like to comment on this? Feel free to raise your digital hand or let Ashley know that you'd like to. All right, I'm not seeing anybody wanting to comment on this item. So Jessica, for this, we don't need a motion. It's maybe we just kind of see this return back in a very short period of time with, in a draft format for us to go forward with. Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. That is the rather long regular agenda that we've had. I don't have that long, so we'll kick this over to the quick update side of thing. I think Jessica's just going to quickly go through those with us and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Two things real quickly. Jessica Morton's your transportation planning manager that we have on your agenda. One is the link to the transit route redesign information page of that process that's ongoing. There's currently a survey out to gather information from people. Adam, if you want to say anything about that, you can in a second. And the other link on your agenda is the monthly KDOT update that they provide to you all for your information about upcoming programs, project dates, and information. Any questions about either of those things or other comments, we'd be happy to entertain those.
This is Adam Michael. I'll just mention that survey that's out, we are going to close that at the end of this week. We've got close to 500 responses, which has been really great. The big piece of that has really been pushing people on trade-off questions. We have a limited budget, so kind of forcing the choice between two difficult things that both could improve transit, but we can't afford to do both. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I think it'll be really good. It'll give our consultant an idea of what our priorities are so they can start putting together scenarios, which is the next phase of that work.
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services. That's all of our quick updates. Any other business to bring to the meeting this afternoon? All right, well, seeing none, our next meeting is August 3rd or another date as necessary by the TAC there. And Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I always get my meetings mixed up. This one, we do not need a motion to adjourn. Is that correct? All right. Well, everybody, it's great to see you all again. If no one has any further business on that one, I will call the meeting to adjourn. So thanks, and we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you.